As we grew, what we saw most of was tragedy. At 4, my uncle was assassinated. In fact, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of his assassination this year. He was assassinated. And so what we saw was great tragedy and people's response to that tragedy. Certainly my mother, his parents, who are my grandparents, his wife, his children, all of my family responding to grief. 1 year later, his brother was found mysteriously drowned in his pool in his backyard. Grief. 5 years after that, my grandmother, my mother's mother, was shot in church on a Sunday morning while she was playing the Lord's Prayer on the organ. Grief. All right, so as we grew, there was so much grief, but also so many lessons because, fortunately, my parents, my mother and father, my uncle Retta, my grandparents, and my grandfather after my grandmother passed, were determined to continue to build an institution which would train people about the life, work, and the teachings of my uncle, and that's the King Center. And so they got busy working on building the King Center. And so as they did that, we were around listening to any number of lessons about my uncle's work and his teachings. And so we grew up with a lot of grief, but also a whole lot of lessons about what my uncle accomplished, his life teachings, and namely nonviolence. And so it was different, somewhat awkward, growing up in this family, not really knowing what that meant early on, except that people would point us out as, oh, you're the niece of Martin Luther King Jr. How does that feel? Did you know him? What do you remember about him? My passion is to help young people get the lessons of nonviolence. So my uncle produced what is known as the 6 steps and 6 principles of nonviolence. And so it's kind of the way he wrote and the way he taught was certainly to be understood by adults. But my passion is to have children to understand and engage and embrace his nonviolent principles and steps. So I have been busy writing children's books about my uncle. I've written 3. To me, the younger that you pick up these kinds of lessons, the more you can do with it. It's harder to change adults. It's harder to change the mindset, the perspective, the thinking, and the behavior of adults. It's easier if we can get that into the minds of children. I think he would say, in fact, I had a dream about him probably 6 to 8 months ago, and it really confirmed for me what he would probably be saying to us. Those of us that know better must do better, all right? If you know better, if you know what the good Lord would have you to do, if you know what the standards are, if you know what must be done, then you do that. It's those of us who don't know better that we have to look out for, and we have to consider that some of us are in better places in terms of education, in terms of finances, in terms of spirituality, in terms of emotional stability than others. So those of us that know better must do better.